All right, we might get started. Did just press record. Welcome, everyone. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are all on today, wherever you are. For me, it is the Wiradjuri Nation. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Indigenous people with us today and watching the recording afterwards. My name is Nick Steeb, and I'm a project manager for equity and diversity at Charles Sturt University in Wagga Wagga. I'm also a member of the EPHEA executive, and I'll be your host today. Before we start, there is just a few housekeeping things to run through. Like I mentioned, today's session will be recorded, so others can watch it later. We're still working out the logistics of where that will be placed, but it will, once the EPHEA website is up and running, be placed there. So please keep your mics on mute while the panel members are speaking. If you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box, which will be monitored by the lovely Catherine, who's the comms coordinator for EPHEA. I would also like to make a small request if you do feel comfortable to do so, and that's to update your Zoom names to include your personal pronouns if you have the availability to do that. Today's session is proudly brought to you by the Equity Practitioners of Higher Education Australasia, and it's the first professional development opportunity we have planned over the coming 18 months. These professional development opportunities will be offered to EPHEA members and will be on a variety of topics. If there's any topic that you would be interested in hearing about, please include that in the feedback form that will be sent out following this session. Implementing all gendered facilities at a higher education institution is the theme of today. And I would like to acknowledge all the amazing work done and being done in the sector, in this space. Today's panel is nowhere near an exhaustive list of institutions doing and progressing work in this area, but we are fortunate enough today to be joined by RMIT, the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, the Auckland University of Technology and the University of the Sunshine Coast, as well as Chris from Pride and Diversity, who will be sharing their journey and how they've got to where they are now, and shared learning and tips that other people can take and learn from. So today on the panel we do have Lara, who is the Associate Director, Student Diversity and Inclusion at RMIT, where she leads the development and implementation of diversity and inclusion strategies and projects with a focus on students. Lara has over 20 years experience in a variety of student and staff focused equity and diversity roles and is currently the Secretary of the Equity Practitioners Association and a member of the Advisory Board for the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education. Welcome, Lara. Marjorie, they, them, is the Diversity Officer, Access and Diversity at the University of the Sunshine Coast and has been at the university for 13 years as an equity practitioner and previously as a student. Their role contributes to the development of diversity, inclusion initiatives and social inclusion agendas and proactively seeks to engage staff, students and the community in these activities by identifying and implementing initiatives that focus on shifting the current emphasis being most on the equity side and targeted solely at a narrow number of equity groups to harness the energy around respectful conduct and relationship in relation to a broad diversity of reviews and approaches. They also coordinate the USC Ally Program, assist with the development and monitoring of university practices and procedures to suit the diverse needs of staff and students. And the example provided is ensuring systems are inclusive and accessible for transitioning students and staff. They also assist in the development of a strong equity, diversity and inclusion framework, which supports the university's overarching diversity and inclusion plan. In their spare time, Marge wears multiple hats. They have been involved in the coordination of the Sunshine Coast Pride Network for over 12 years, been part of the board for Queensland Council of LGBTI Health, founder of Shout, LGBTIQ youth group, now run by Headspace, and they're a devoted carer for their elderly parents, farm and garden lover. So welcome, Marge. Audrey, they them, identifies as non-binary and was the first New Zealand university staff member to be in the role of Rainbow Student Coordinator. AUT was the first university to be accredited with the New Zealand Rainbow Tick, accredited for the Student Association and accreditation for the institution. This accreditation recognises the support an organisation has in its HR policies and in practice for Rainbow people. Audrey co-chaired the Staff Rainbow Network and has been an active member of this group for several years. They've also been a member of the inaugural Auckland City Council Rainbow Advisory Panel for a 3-year term. This panel advises the Mayor and Councillors of Auckland City on the needs of Rainbow people and how to create inclusive events, support Rainbow people to move about their city safely, and enable visibility of Rainbow communities. Audrey led the project at AUT to establish all-gender bathrooms for staff and students and uses this experience to influence the Auckland Council to create all-gender bathrooms in cities' public facilities. Audrey is now the Director of Student Wellbeing at AUT and continues to influence support and wellbeing for Rainbow people. Chris has been a Senior Relationship Manager at Pride and Diversity for the last 3 years after being the Head of HR for the Commonwealth Bank Risk Management Division. Prior to this, Chris has held several senior human resources roles with over 20 years experience in the finance and insurance industry across both specialist and generalist areas. Chris was a foundation leadership member of the Commonwealth Bank's LGBTI Network Unity. And Chris holds a Bachelor of Theology, a graduate certificate in adult education, and an MBA from Macquarie Graduate School of Management. So thank you all so much for being here. The first question that I might throw to the panel is, can you please give us a brief overview of your institution's journey around LGBTIQ plus inclusion and implementing all gendered facilities? So that goes for toilets, bathrooms, change rooms, and all of the other ones that come with that. Lara, I might start with you, if that's okay, seeing as RMIT was the Employer of the Year for 2 years running for the Australian Workplace Equality Index. Could you please, share your journey?
Happy to do that. And of course, acknowledging that, we're far from the nirvana as far as provision of any accessible or all gender facilities goes. And so, really nice to get that acknowledgement that there's still heaps to do. And I suppose just where we've come from, when we 5 years ago, we set out to identify what would good practice across the university look like, engaged in a whole heap of consultation, considered best practice by Pride and Diversity Index, essentially engaged leadership and operational units all across the university, and with the help of a working group comprising academic staff, professional staff and students, made up an action plan under our diversity and inclusion framework called our Diverse Genders, Sexes and Sexualities Action Plan. And it included, actions across the breadth. And it's through the steady engagement of operational units and staff and students across the university, but also importantly our leadership, that we've been able to take this whole of community action. I co-chair that group with the other co-chairs are representatives from our student union, our RUSU, RMIT University Student Union. The queer officers there are the co-chairs, and it's been really lovely to have that partnership in all the work and to take that whole of community approach across staff and students.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Marge, if you might go up next.
Thank you. We were approached back in 2019 by our Student Representative Council, as well as we were having a large cohort of new students enrolling who were identifying as trans. So we made it a priority to look into what needed to be done for students to feel supported and part of their study journey. So we looked at it as a much bigger approach than just facilities. So yeah, we looked at facilities as well as systems and so forth.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Audrey?
Kia ora koutou. At AUT, the rainbow work essentially has been done by the Out at AUT Staff Network, which is a social group, by the way. It's not a by no means a paid role or positions. So for many years, the staff network had lobbied to have rainbow communities included in our strategic plan, which was successful in 2012. There had always been a commitment for diverse groups and marginalised groups, etc. For example, Māori and Pacifica, Disabilities International, but Rainbow had never been formally named. So with the success of that, other things really quite massive achievements have happened since then. So it just proves that the whole top-down approach actually works. Part of the work of the network was we lobbied to have a rainbow coordinator to support the students, and I ended up being in that role when it was first established in 2012. Then along came the Rainbow TIC accreditation, as you explained, Nick. And then around 2015, I was approached by several students around bathrooms. And I believe that because we were in all documentation as a diverse group, as a recognised as a commitment by the institution, that the bathroom changes we needed to make, in hindsight, happened quite easy. At the time, it was a massive, massive project. One of the issues that I'm sure other people have got on their mind is there was no allocated funding to rebuild existing bathrooms. So if we were looking at changing male bathrooms to all gender, there was no money to change it. So the only thing that we could really do was take existing female bathrooms and change those to all gender, because there was no rebuilding that needed to be done, and also utilise our accessible bathrooms. I'm not too sure of the terminology you use there, but for people who need wheelchair access, who need assistance. So therefore, really a change in signage was the only way forward.
Yep.
And that's what we did.
No, thank you. You know, I think the three universities are at different stage on the journey. You know, Auckland started in 2012. Marge, you said last year that it kind of started. Chris, I did want to, I guess, look at it more broadly across the higher institution sector around how we are moving towards it, and I guess what constitutes best practice around all gendered facilities. You're on mute, sorry.
So I've got the easy question then. Across higher education, there are huge differences. What I've found, and particularly because I've had a lot to do with Sydney University, and because University were on this path for quite some time, with the new buildings that they were building, and they had quite a number that were being rolled out, they were able to incorporate all gender bathrooms as standard in lots of their new buildings as the only bathroom there. And it was signage as well. So they went through a lot of contacts and consultation around signage to make the signage welcome for everybody. It's funny, in my organisation, ACON, where we should be leaps and bounds ahead, you would imagine, since we talk about this to people all the time. We had quite a lot of difficulty in retrofitting all gender bathroom into a very, very old building. With some success and some not as successful. Most of our ground floor bathrooms were all single use. So a single use bathroom can be renamed so easily into an all gender bathroom. And that's easy, that was a quick win. It's public bathrooms that we had on our meeting floors or where people would come to our occupied floors, but for counselling, proved more difficult. And we tried to tackle that with signage. And the signage rather was not about who can use this bathroom, but what's behind this door. And that was more helpful. But there are many, many drawbacks around and hurdles to get over. One being that every state has a different building code and regulations around that, which is not simple. One of the best things that we've had a little hand in is being able to help with the formation of an LGBTQ building construction and building management forum called Interbuild, where that's their #1 priority, is to talk about and get this moving on. So in all our different jurisdictions, how do we make this happen? How can we make it happen easily? And I think as Audrey said, one of the easier ones is to rename the what we might have called the disabled bathroom in previous years. One of the things I had never thought about, because it's way out of my thinking, was the symbols that have to be on these signage for people who are neurodiverse can't be so obtuse that no one understands what the symbols mean. So there's a whole range of competing priorities there. And one that I often get from members, certainly not in the higher education sector, but elsewhere is, and I hear it to this day, Chris, what you don't understand is the women's bathroom is a safe place for women. And there's a safety aspect there that's also really important. So you do have quite competing agendas there happening, and trying to keep that on track, especially when you can't go in over the weekend and rebuild the toilet yourself, is problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have raised some points, particularly around, I guess, surveying or consultation around this process. And I really want to, I guess, draw out who the key stakeholders involved in these discussions ongoing have been. I think, Lara, you mentioned senior leadership in particular and that top-down kind of support, but how did you go about it? I think, Marge, you mentioned students came to you as well, but Lara, I might start with you, and I guess who are the key stakeholders and how did you try and get them on board?
So the real push for some additional provision was a major campus redevelopment, and luckily we already had a great relationship with our property director because he was on our accessibility working group. And so I think that's one of the things I'd sort of suggest is look for those opportunities for alignment across a whole number of fronts.
Yeah,
that's worked really well for us. And so it was basically a conversation about making the toilet provision in that new facility all gender right from the outset, and that was going to be the default provision, and then there were going to be other ones dotted around the place. And so it was then that we had the conversation with some folks from the property services team, the RUSU co-chairs, the diverse genders, sexes and sexualities working group, me and a few other folks and some additional students, really to workshop nuts and bolts around, well, what should this actually look like? And I think, that is one of the challenges, because at the time there weren't Australian standards to call on. There wasn't agreed language. We acknowledge we didn't get the language right. We're changing that. But it was really just saying, what's the best we can do right now? And in the end, the choice around language and signage was really driven by our student union. Yeah. They had the final say. And I think, it's because we had that really strong partnership with them, but also because our property team recognised that they needed to speak to people who could provide that advice. But we also obviously sought advice from specialist organisations, so Transgender Victoria and so on,
Yep.
really to make sure that we were not only obviously engaging our own student and staff community, but also drawing on the best of that independent advice where we could.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems very holistic approach, like external stakeholders, but everyone internally as well, that, you know, this could and does affect. So thank you. Marge, I might go to you next around key stakeholders.
Yep. So because we hadn't sort of approached executive as yet, so we developed quite a lengthy proposal to go to executive level to our Vice Chancellor Equity and Diversity Committee, and that had a string of different proposals. So we broke it into short or immediate recommendations, and then medium, and then long term. So we knew that doing a whole of campus change or rebuild was going to be totally out of the question. So we then consulted with other areas on the campus as to what could be that good fit for that that immediate change. So that's where we went down the path of changing signage on our accessible bathrooms and accessible toilets. So, but by doing this, we also looked outside of the box, that we're also creating more spaces for people who are carers with young children. So we didn't have to be trying to take little Johnny into the girls' bathroom or something like that when he wanted to be a boy. So, and by doing that, we were able to get full support from executive level. All gender bathrooms was also high on the priority for Athena Swan. So
Yep.
we were going through our applications there as well. Student support. We also had staff support with staff requesting facilities as well. And we consulted with sort of the externally Human Rights Commission,
Yep.
Queensland Council for Healthy Communities, LGBTI Health, and then also looked at international best practice as well through TransEDU research, but also internationally around building standard codes. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I guess, you know, going on that international standard side of things, Audrey, your key stakeholders at AUT around this process?
Just prior to the project to have all gender facilities, I was doing a couple of years of quite intense workshopping around the organisation. There was a real push around diversity around 2012 onwards, where we brought on board a lot of new positions to support diversity initiatives. So there was a lot of energy in the organisation to really do better in this area. And it was really fortunate, the timing. And so I was then asked to workshop with all staff from senior management right through. And I strategically targeted senior management first, because I knew that I needed to inform them of what the issues were, bring them on board, so whenever I went to them for funding or to get things across the line, that I wouldn't have to re-explain. And I did get a little bit tired of having to quote negative stats and negative research and all that sort of stuff about our communities, but it had to be done to get their awareness raised that this was a really serious issue. Of course, the staff network and the student networks were all involved. I worked with the disability support team, who then had consultation with our students who they support, because it was really important to us. Not only is it a legislative compliance that we have accessibility, accessible bathrooms, but we didn't want to put our disability community offside or have them think that the bathrooms were no longer available to them. So we made it really clear in our comms that if anyone who has a mobility assistance need, or someone has a guide dog or a baby or assisting an elderly person, they take priority to those facilities over able-bodied diverse people who can go to another floor to use that facility. Of course, the estates, the people who had to make the signs and put the signs up, that was probably where a lot more effort went to bring them on board. You're talking to people who have a specific skill set and not entirely interested in a lot of social impact, and how having the wrong image on a sign can really change everything. Yeah, so that's it was wide and varied. Also, our comms team, our people who are responding to media, putting out communications to staff and students, there needed to be a lot of time with them as well. There was a lot of making allies in the process.
Yeah, and having those active supporters around you, which I think leads on really nicely to the next question, which is around, you know, mitigating the challenges or resistance that comes up, because any change within any institution or organisation does bring about some change. So how did you mitigate the resistance, and particularly in light of the fact that there is no kind of national standards on this topic? Lara, I might start with you.
Yes, these things are not straightforward, particularly when you're talking about, you know, many years of familiarity with the standard and the sorts of challenges that people have mentioned from a range of individuals at our campuses. We're also conscious that, you know, our campus is a permeable space, very open to the public, and so it really needed to be about universal design and provision for the whole community across a range of dimensions. And so we did have a comms campaign, obviously, and we had, you know, I think it is all about using every single lever that you've got, and it is about making sure that you've got the people who can drive the change. The property services team were well and truly on board, bringing the whole DGSS working group and the student and staff community along in that conversation, having them listen to, and they actually influence down to the detail of, you know, the doors and the signage and the whole provision. And so bringing them into the conversation and making sure our property services team were rock solid in their commitment to seeing it through. And so we did have that, the comms campaign, and we did have some posters and, you know, announcing, you know, as additional support to the change. And some of those were taken down, but our property services team were right on it, you know. Next day they were back up again. And so it is about having them, you know, well and truly immersed in the detail of why this is necessary, why are we doing this, and their commitment really to seeing it through. So I think it's just relentless advocacy is what's required, and just staying the course. And, you know, we've had some continued discussions around the provision in some new developments and new facilities, and, you know, some ongoing challenges, but that's just again been a matter of working it through the good relationships between our student union, our DGSS working group and the property services team to make sure that everybody feels like that there is a facility that is appropriate for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Marge, resistance and how you mitigated that resistance.
I think we were very fortunate that we didn't really get any resistance internally. But in saying that, whilst there's no Pacific building standards, we again then look to international best practice, because there are standards within American building codes, which Australia is actually linked to. And so we use that kind of, I suppose, information and data as part of our overall recommendation to executive. So we could show that we did a depth of research, and it was fully supported. And it's been taken on as a commitment by our capital commercial teams who are in charge of all ongoing rebuilds, and it's been basically embedded in that planning that any new buildings will have non-gendered bathrooms implemented.
That's great. And we'll discuss longevity a little bit later, but no, thank you for that, Marge. Audrey,
Yeah, resistance. Couple of things on that. There were two main issues. One was feedback from groups who clearly just had no idea that this was happening. So we had a great comms plan. Unfortunately, what happened is the comms weren't delivered on time. So we did all the re-signage of bathrooms and changing facilities after the end of semester 2. So around mid-November through to mid-December was all the actual signage change, all ready for coming back to semester 1 in late February the next year. And unfortunately, everyone came back in the new semester and the comms hadn't been done. So I was fielding a lot of letters from some students, mainly parents. The main theme was, my daughter will be raped in an all-gender bathroom. People will go in there to have sex. It's not safe. So back to re-educating everyone, getting the comms out, a real big push with that. There was a bit of media coverage externally, mainly trying to pick up that we were disadvantaging our disabled communities. So the media team, this is why I said before, having them fully informed of why we're doing it, they were able to respond to that. The other group that comes in here is the people who are unwilling to accept this happening. And unfortunately, there was a very small group of staff who was students. Once you explain things to them, they were fine. But we did have a small group of staff who really took it to great lengths. And the Vice-Chancellor's office actually took care of that. They completely backed what we were doing. They drew staff attention back to our diversity policies, our strategic plan, etc. So I felt really supported by that senior level of management. And when a couple of people pursued it even further, they were told very clearly that this is our commitment here and it's what we do here. So pretty much the underlying message is jump on board if you want to be here. So yeah, we got through that. Biggest hiccup of all was the comms, and that caused a lot of headaches.
But no, it definitely goes to show the importance of that senior leadership buy-in and support and leadership as well. So thank you for sharing. Chris, in your role as a relationship manager for Pride and Diversity members, you would obviously have these discussions around mitigating that kind of resistance. And I guess what advice do you give to organisations who might come up with some resistance?
Well, thank goodness, I think Marjorie and Lara and Audrey have already said that. But it is getting your senior executives on board and getting, being very upfront about this is why we're doing it, and being able to talk about that and communicate it effectively so that when people do have issues and other things, and they're quite vocal in those, as Audrey said, you take it back to your values, you take it back to your values around inclusion and so forth. This is why we're doing this. I think that's the most important. And the comms plan that explains everything, I think is really important in overcoming that sort of resistance. Now, do we all remember the Prime Minister and Cabinet's Department issue last year? They're still reeling from that. And I don't know enough about it, but I suspect they didn't go sufficiently senior enough to talk about why this was important before putting little signs on their bathroom doors. And yeah, they weren't prepared for the backlash that happened, I think, through shock jock radio and so forth. And it's quite scarring. And you hear it an awful lot, oh, we don't want that. No, you don't want that. And that is, consultation, leadership buy-in, and good communications. And, for those that say, oh, I'm just not comfortable, there are other options for you. And that's important in a large institution. If you're a smallish institution, and all universities, most universities have some campuses that are in cities that they may have, in office blocks and so forth, where they have to share facilities with a whole bunch of others. I think that's another question, but that leads to a whole, it's a very frightening approach sometimes to try and round all those cats up and get them on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The next question that I do have is drawing out, I guess, what the biggest challenge that you've come across while implementing all gendered facilities, and how you overcame that challenge. I know, Audrey, you mentioned particularly the comms plan not going out in time, and I think that's a really important lesson to ensure the comms are great, but also, them going out on time and making sure that it's communicated in a timely manner to everyone. Lara, biggest challenge from RMIT and how you overcame it?
Well, I think, the early days provision went pretty smoothly and pretty well, apart from some, comms hiccups and, but, just needed to take those tactical actions to respond in the moment. The bigger challenge is actually the evolution of existing facilities and how we're ensuring that in that context of finite space, that every member of our community is able to feel that there is provision for them, and that we're very clear around that, and we also resource it appropriately and communicate about it more frequently than anyone thinks we have to. And so it's just continuing that and working it through on an item by item basis. Some of the things that we're trying to do, we have done for systemic change, include embedding that provision across a number of different issues into the revision of the RMIT device design standards, so that it's, that's kind of there's Australian standard over here, then our property team want to go above and beyond the Australian standard, the building code, and then how we articulate that is in our design standards. So that sets the benchmark, if you like, across a whole range of issues about what the provision should be and how we should communicate and engage the community on that. But, like I said, we're not perfect, far from it, and we still have some ongoing issues in relation to the provision. So there's still some stickiness, and that work won't be done. There's no point where you can reach the perfect provision and say, right, well, job done. that's over, move on. So it's just a matter of having that continued attention, working through, responding to changes in terminology. So we have to shift our practice, as I've said, and we can do that because we recognise that that language and the provision absolutely needs to be led by the community as issues and needs emerge. And so that requires negotiation, consultation, engagement, continual discussion, and resourcing to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that. Marge, biggest challenge and how you overcame it?
I think the biggest challenge that we had was ensuring that all key areas were up to date on the changes. So again, communication. Areas, for example, like our marketing teams and things like that, they took everything on board really, really quickly, to the extent that at Christmas time, when we had our solar nights expose of the campus, they put specific signage out with arrows pointing to the all-gendered bathrooms for community members and so forth. And that's probably where we got our challenge from, was basically the media picking up the signage and then making contact and wanting a statement as to what we were doing and so on and so forth, and had a string of other questions. So it was around making sure that our university spokespeople had the right information around why, what, how type of thing. So, but yeah, that's mainly was our main challenge, and it was overcome quite easily. So.
Great, that's awesome. I know that each of you have discussed the kind of longevity of all gendered bathrooms, particularly as new buildings come up, and making sure that you keep up to date with the evolving terminology. I know there's been a shift from gender neutral to all gendered bathrooms over the last few years as well. But did any of you want to make any further points around ensuring longevity within your institution around all gendered facilities? Yeah, Lara?
Oh yeah, just one from us, which is about celebrating the people who've made it happen.
Yep.
And really publicly calling out their leadership. So I nominated our property director for a leadership award based on how he had worked to transform our campuses across a range of dimensions of accessibility and inclusion and diversity and equity. And so it's about, you know, signalling that this is something that we positively value, and that our leaders being affirmed and recognised and congratulated for that. But something else that happened is we won, you know, a bit early on, we won an award by our Globe organisation for a gay and lesbian networking, won a Protecting Our Community award. And so that again was about engaging the senior leaders on that award. And our DVCE got to make the speech, and I'll never forget it because she chose that moment in a ballroom, you know, full of people all dressed up to the nines and having a great time to talk about and talk really positively about the provision of our, what were then at the time, gender neutral facilities. And she actually called out the number, and, you know, she got a bit of a whoop and a cheer, you know, from that. So I still think now that is the only time a DVC education will ever talk about toilets in one of her speeches. But the fact that we wrote that in there and she was happy to say it is again about affirming the achievement, and we all take pride in it. So yeah, I just thought that was a really nice moment.
Absolutely, thank you. Marge or Audrey, Chris, anything about longevity that you want to mention?
No, just reassuring that yeah, it's continual communication. So yes, there's a written commitment that everything will be included in plans and things like that. But things can slip. So it's about making sure that there is a diversity and inclusion champion, or that champion is actually part of our higher level executive committees and that sort of thing, to keep that reminder going on around all-inclusive facilities going into our new buildings, and yeah, looking at ways of upgrades and so on for current buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Audrey?
It's really important. I've found that, you know, staff sometimes leave, the student groups change, the staff network, which is our social network that's been behind a majority of this, they all have their full-time roles in the institution. So it's been really important to designate responsibility to somebody, and that somebody here is the Rainbow coordinator that carries on that role. To make sure that the maps are online. Every time we change to a new intranet or a new platform, that the map is there, that there's awareness of the facilities, and if any signage comes down, a lot of people will ignore it. So there's somebody that has to take responsibility for the follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure it is someone's specific designated responsibility, I think, is a really important point. Before we, Chris, sorry.
I was just going to reiterate what Audrey said. I think that is the most important thing. People do leave and move on. If these things aren't written into your you know, arrangements when we're looking at new premises or when we're building new premises or whatever, if these things aren't there in the way that we now just automatically think that there'll be an accessible toilet, because you don't think otherwise anymore. And I'd like that to be that sort of part that, excuse my cat here, that we don't have to think about it anymore. It's just part of our DNA. We know how to we know how to do this. It's just what we do from now on. That's the ideal. But yes, writing that in and writing into sufficient people's position descriptions or so forth, so that, you know, D&I's across it. If you have an employee network, they're across it. If you have a building and services, it's there as well. So that if one falls out, there's others to sort of capture that, and that gives it a sustainability, which then we don't necessarily have to think about. It's just part of what we do from now on.
Yep, becomes business as usual.
Yes.
Before we open it up to questions from the attendees, so please type them in the chat. I just wanted the panel members to share just their number one tip for institutions that might not be as far along, and what is the number one tip that you would give. Lara?
Oh, a number one tip. I think it's to situate it within a broader context, which is to say that it's got to be part of a leadership and community-led whole of community response. And so it's not treating it as an isolated issue that you have to campaign over. It's part of some systemic change agenda.
That's already occurring.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you. Marge?
I totally agree with Lara, and I suppose the other one would be around risk to the institution. So just because it's not embedded in a policy or this, that, everything else, look outside the square, outside the circle, and look at the risk to your institution if you yourself don't look forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important one. Audrey?
I would encourage that you have a very well planned, robust awareness raising education process beforehand, that this whole project is not hurried, it can't be hurried. And I think the biggest issue here, key point here, is to take your time in consulting with your stakeholders, include the internal and external disability community. We're going to be changing signage on accessibility doors. Hold forums with staff and students, give people the opportunity to have a say. We did do a lot of consultation, but in hindsight, I think we could have done more, and that may have just preempted some of that pushback that we had in the end.
Yep. So really thorough consultation, I think, is an important point. Chris, one tip you would share?
I would put it as part of your overarching trans and gender diverse, not so much policy, but the strategy. So changing the bathrooms on its own is a good thing, but it doesn't make you an employer of choice for trans and gender diverse people. It's just one part of that. So tying that in, and I think then that also helps people understand, well, if we have a gender affirmation policy, if we can talk about what that means in terms of pronouns and the various other things that we do to make trans and gender diverse people feel welcome and invited through our our employment and recruitment practice and so forth. This is just part of that, to make this institution an employer of choice. Now we deal with employers and employees, but you can broaden that. It's a university of choice for people who want to work there and people who want to come and study there, that they will feel, that they should feel from the moment or even before they set foot on campus, they're included, they belong.
And they're safe. No, definitely, thank you. We do have some questions coming in. The first one is from Georgia around Victorian University of Wellington. They're currently doing a new build or renovation policy, and their latest rebuild design did not have any gendered bathrooms included on one floor of a building plan, and concerns have since been raised from staff who are not able to use all gendered bathrooms due to religious reasons, so would need to use alternative building bathrooms. So what considerations have you given and taken in regards to ethnic and religious sensitivities when allocating all gendered bathroom spaces? I might open that up to the panel to see who wants to start on that one. I think it does go to, I think what everyone is saying around that extensive consultation process and ensuring that, you know, those with ethnic and religious backgrounds are involved in that consultation. So the points are raised. And yeah, Audrey, your hand's up.
This is not specifically about ethnic groups or religious groups, but one thing that we did ensure that there was equity as far as any student or staff member on any given floor only had to go one floor up or down to a bathroom of their choice. So on one floor there was a male bathroom and a female bathroom, and then on the next floor there may have been a male bathroom and an all-gender bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And just to ensure that everyone was in really close proximity. And Chris mentioned before about really old buildings. They drove me nuts, those old buildings. And so what we had to do, because we had a really old engineering building that was just about falling to bits, so I had to make sure that the exit to that building, the next building next to it, that there's the bathrooms there was an all-gender bathroom. Because in the old engineering building there were lots of male and female bathrooms. So it's about making sure you've got really good numbers and you're sharing the accessibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I also noticed you had your mic off earlier. Did you have any points?
Well, I was going to say, and look, this is something I haven't specifically thought about, so thank you for bringing that to my attention. But again, you've got a large number of different stakeholders here, and they have their wants or their rights or their needs, and I think we need to listen to them and understand how can you capture everyone there to the best that you can. And you know, if we were to capture everyone, that may mean we have more toilets than anything else, and that's probably not the right answer. But you have gone through that consultation, and you try and make the decisions in the end as equitable as possible for the different diversity groups who, you know, that are sometimes in competition with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The other question was, how were the changes supported in terms of building sign-off under the code? Was facilities supported to challenge the code? That question came from Heather. Yeah.
Nick, just speaking to the second one first, I suppose we haven't done external advocacy around that, but we think that this is an opportunity for us now, building on some of the recognition that we've received for our provision for diversity, inclusion and equity at RMIT, is to consider what's our influence beyond the doors. And I think that other institutions that are similar to us or, you know, evolving in their practice, we've all got that capacity to contribute to shaping both the standards, the formal rules that articulate what the expectation should be, but also the bodies that lead some of that work. And so, yeah, that's something that we're hoping to get into a little bit more, and we're having conversations about our next strategic plan right now, and that's certainly an ambition that we're foreshadowing as part of that consultation process, is how can we influence supply chain, procurement, and have that greater leadership role, if you like, in influencing others and supporting others too.
Absolutely.
And recognising their good practice too, I should say.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you participating in this panel is part of that kind of knowledge sharing and sharing your journey with us all as well as, you know, Audrey and Marge. So thank you. Anyone else on the building codes? Yeah. All right, well, we are 2 minutes away from 1 o'clock, and I don't think there is any more questions coming through. But any kind of formal thoughts from the panel members before we wrap up?
Just to say thanks to you, Nick, and to Catherine from EPHEA for bringing us all together. I think there's a lot of potential for this sort of online workshop for us into the future. So thanks for bringing us together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was a wonderful discussion, and while we talk about us having some sort of expertise in LGBTQ inclusion, I've learned some things that I wouldn't have thought about had we not had this discussion. And I think this discussion and going forward is how you change the way people think, and you're doing some adequacy even if you weren't intending to, just by you're broadening the conversation in ways that we could you imagine having this conversation 5 years ago?
And I really think for me as well, my takeaway for this is everyone's journey is really individual to their institution, and there is, shared knowledge that we can apply within our institutions, but it is about, surveying kind of what the current status of your institution looks like and what will work for your institution. I know for us at Charles Sturt, we have 7 different kind of campuses of various sizes. So, it does take a little bit more to make sure that everyone across those campuses have access to all gendered facilities, and how we go about implementing that is really an individual kind of conversation that we need to have with those campuses. We might wrap up there, but thank you so much to Marge, Audrey, Chris and Lara for participating and sharing your journey and knowledge, and Catherine for all your incredible support. Putting this together, it will be the first of many for a variety of different topics over the next 18 months, so please keep a lookout for those. We also will send out a feedback form just to get your thoughts on this session and maybe some input into some future sessions. And this session will also be recorded for you to share around, and we'll send out some information about how to access this recording. But thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your Monday afternoon.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, Catherine. That worked really well, I think. Everything fine from your end?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that went really well. Yeah, that was really good. I hope people find that really, really useful to to get started, because I think especially coming from, I really loved, Marge, how you mentioned the community media concerns. I know here we're so risk averse, everyone went straight to rape or assault when we started the conversations. It was so strange. I didn't get it, where they were coming from at all. So
yeah, it was tricky because it happened on a weekend, and so it was sort of like, well, who's available to talk on a Sunday, and it just went around the circle. But we're just lucky that everyone was on the same wavelength, I suppose, and we've got some amazing champions in our executive that were able to talk through it. So
yeah, right. It's definitely funny, isn't it? But